Hi guys, so I just wanted to take some time to address some of the common teacher concerns when approaching the project-based learning model for education. Uh, First, I've heard quite frequently that there is a fear of having enough time and being able to cover all of the standards in the allotted time that we get throughout the year. And secondly, how do we manage students while they're doing this independent sort of learning? So those are two things I want to address. First, the idea of time and coverage. One of the best analogies I've heard for this is in Understanding by Design. And in that sort of textbook model, the authors discuss this history teacher who is so concerned that he's not going to have enough time to make it through all of the standards that he needs to cover. So when he has this epiphany that he's not going to make it through the standards, he does the math and realizes, well, I'm going to have to cover 60 pages a day, and that's the only way that my kids are going to make it through every standard we need to cover by the time we get to testing in April. So with that in mind, he designs these really run-of-the-mill lectures where he's able to just like truck through the textbook, and he actually retracts some of the most meaningful assignments that he had originally planned for the students. So they were supposed to engage in this mock debate was one of them, and he takes that out. So they no longer get to actually interact with the material that they're learning, but they're just learning so that they can make sure that they pass this test. And it seems kind of silly when we say it out loud, but in a lot of ways, that's what we do as an educator. I know I've done that many times. Like you get so concerned, especially when you're at a school. Like I've been teaching for the past 2 years at a Title I school. There's this consistent fear that the kids, the school grade needs to go up, and the kids have to score at this level for it to go up. So we have to just drill and kill, drill and kill, drill and kill. And the problem is that we lose so many students by teaching with that philosophy anyway. So it's really important for us to remember, I think, why we became teachers in the first place, and that it's so much bigger than just those standardized tests. And obviously, we want to do well, and we want our kids to do well because it shows like, hey, we're doing a good job. But if the kids get beyond our class and they don't know how to transfer the materials that they learned within the course of the class to the real world and to the unique circumstances that they might approach in college or in the workplace, then they didn't really learn anything at all, and it kind of defeats the purpose of what we're doing. Uh, Another thing that I know has been a concern, and it was a concern for me at one point, is what about our lower learners? Are they able to handle this sort of self-guided educational model? And again, in Understanding and Design, the authors talk a lot about how we let these kids who we consider to be like our lower learners fall by the wayside because we don't think that we can release them to do this sort of inquiry-based instruction, so we continue teaching at them. And one of the ideas that they approach is that the reason that they are lower learners is because they're not able to learn by the educational model that they've been learning by. So by insisting on drilling and killing, we're actually losing so many more of those students who need inquiry-based instruction to stay engaged and to actually learn and be able to apply these learning experiences to the real world. Lastly, I want to talk a little bit about managing students during this time. And again, as an educator, that was one of my biggest fears as well. And I've heard a lot of teachers ask about this, like, how are we going to make sure that the kids are actually learning? How do we account for this? How do we manage even student behavior during these times where they're able to spend 30 minutes just, doing self-guided research, or 30 minutes building a project or designing something on their own? And as crazy as it sounds, even the most unruly students react so well to this model. And that's why PBL is so amazing, because it's not only getting those kids who are overachievers that are going to learn by any means necessary, but it's also catching those kids that are our lower learners and even our behavioral problems. Just to give you a brief example, I started practicing PBL last year, and one of the groups of kids that I practiced it on was a very, very challenging group. I got them in the middle of the school year. It was a seventh grade class that I inherited when their teacher actually resigned from the school because they were just running amok. So I inherit this class, and a lot of them are level ones and twos, but beyond that, they are just behavioral issues. But it's because when I stand in front of the class and teach at them, they're not really getting anything anyway, so they're not listening, and they're just, doing whatever and getting easily distracted because they're not engaged. So having this sort of program that keeps those kids engaged really helped me to connect with them and to make sure that they were actually learning something. So we did a unit on perception and reality, which is actually one of the ones that's inside the sample projects. So definitely check that out. But during this unit, my kids were so engaged, and there were no behavior problems, like problems that when I would stand in front of the classroom and teach to them, we would have. Now all of a sudden they're in a stage where they're able to actually design, and they're creating scripts, and they're creating children's books, and they're reimagining these villains and putting them into new stories, and they're coming up with unique ways to solve problems. I was seeing kids like flip their tablets and their computers into tablets and start drawing and tracing and just bringing these characters to life, and it was something that was really astonishing for me as an educator because I did not expect that from these kids. There were even things that I didn't know. Like, they're like, how do I create a script? How do I create a podcast? And I'm like, I'm not sure. Let's figure it out. And they're figuring it out with me, and they're interested in it, and they're learning these life skills. And it was really a remarkable thing to watch and a huge learning experience for me as an educator. So I just want to encourage you to not count those kids out. And whether, even if it's a challenging class, a group that has maybe behavioral issues, short attention spans, or lower test scores, maybe those things are a byproduct of the way that we've been teaching, and maybe PBL can really help us save those kids. So keep that in mind, and keep in mind, of course, that it doesn't matter how much you cover if the kids are not actually learning and interacting with the material, because it's not staying in their brains past the test. So likely, if you're just trucking through a textbook like this, they're not going to do well on the test anyway. And beyond the test, they're still not going to do well because they haven't learned how to transfer those skills. So having them interact with these different larger than life concepts and real world concepts in the classroom teaches them how to take those standards that we've taught them, apply them to unique circumstances, and then that allows them to really go into the world and use what they've learned, and for it to continue to serve them throughout the rest of their lives.